channel for another bike review. Today we've got this. It's one of my all-time favourite bikes, a 2002 Aprilia RSV Mille R. Quite funny to call it one of my all-time favourite bikes because today is actually going to be the first time riding this specific shape RSV. So I do personally own the RSV R, which is a Gen 2. I did a review for that bike last year on the channel, and then I have previously owned a fair few two-stroke Aprilia RS bikes, which obviously share the same shape as this. So this shaped bike feels very familiar to me. So a little history about this bike. In the late 90s, Aprilia said that they were going to create their first 1000cc superbike, and it caught the world's attention. After winning multiple championships on 125cc, 250 machine bikes, and introducing us to riders such as Max Biaggi, Valentino Rossi, there's no doubt that Aprilia knew exactly what they were doing when it came to racing. But the big question was, what could they do at their very first attempt at making a superbike? So in 1999, the original RSV broke cover and was instant competition for Ducati at the time. In 2001, the RSV was revised and tweaked with actually over 200 minor changes to the bike, and it was further revised again in 2003 before they moved on to the next gen shape, the Gen 2 RSVR. The RSV was offered in three variants. So you had the base model RSV, you had the RSV Mille R, which is what we've got here. So this featured full Öhlins, front rear, steering damper, aluminium forged wheels, is single seat only, and is dressed in lots of carbon fibre. Final variant of this shape RSV was the RSV SP, which was the ultimate spec RSV. Featured things like an adjustable frame, full Öhlins, carbon fairing, and an alloy tank. It also came with a £23,000 price tag, which was a phenomenal amount of money for a superbike 20 years ago. Now I do sometimes see people getting confused with the RSV Mille R and the RSVR that I reviewed last year on the channel. So from 1998 to 2003, the RSV Mille was the base model bike, and the RSV Mille R signified the higher spec version like what we've got here. From 2004 onwards, so the next shaped RSV, the RSV R actually became the base model, and then you had the RSV R Factory, which was the higher spec bike. So the heart of the bike, we have the 998cc V-twin motor, which was designed and manufactured by Rotax, and produces just shy of 130 brake horsepower, which is not crazy by today's standards, but 20 years ago that was seriously impressive. Outsourcing all of the engine work to Rotax allowed Aprilia to concentrate on exactly what they do best, which is building a winning chassis. Many reviewers from the time when the RSV was first released commented that even though it's a 1000cc V-twin bike, it handles like a much smaller machine. Again, a throwback to the two-stroke success that Aprilia had. For suspension, so we've got a full Öhlins setup on the R model, so shock back here, steering damper and forks. For slowing us down, the R model that we've got here is equipped with dual 320mm discs up front with 4 piston calipers, and that's from Brembo. Now the more observant of you will notice that this is not a standard Aprilia RSV Mille R. So Aprilia produced 300 limited edition Noriyuki Haga replicas, which featured various goodies, most notably the replica bodywork, a full Aquaprova titanium exhaust, and a different injection unit that was mapped for the Aqua system. Now sadly this isn't one of those limited run 300 bikes, but it does sport the full Haga bodywork and an Aqua cam. So being that today those original 300 bikes are super elusive, you know, you'd have to be very fortunate if you get an opportunity to buy one, and for sure will be for a sizable amount more money than what you can pick up a base model RSVR. So for the most of us, this is the next best thing as owning one of those limited edition bikes. So I'm absolutely itching to get going on this bike, but just before we do, I want to say a massive thank you to the guys at JD Comps for supplying me with a bike today. So for those of you that are regulars here on the channel, you'll know that we've worked quite closely with JD Comps over the last year. They've been fantastic to us. They've given us a lot of really great bikes to make content with, and the best part is they give you the chance to win the bike that's been featured in the video. If you want to get your name in hat for a chance to win this bike, I'll leave the link that you need in the description section of this video. Okay, so first impressions. Not actually quite what I thought. As I mentioned, apologies about the wind noise by the way, we're right by the coast here. It's surprising how windy it gets even on a nice day like today. As I mentioned, I own the Gen 2 version of this bike, so the RSVR,
and it's for the most part a pretty difficult bike to ride. The clutch is very heavy, neutral is almost impossible to find, doesn't particularly like going slow. So while I was really excited to get the chance to ride this bike, the Gen 1 RSV, I was expecting it to be quite a handful, I'm not going to lie. But early impressions are the exact opposite. It actually seems easier to ride than the Gen 2, which surprised me a lot. So we're going to go and find some bigger, faster, twisty roads soon. But the first thing I want to do is nip through town and we'll fill her up. Obviously, as was the case with a lot of older bikes, even some modern bikes in fact, there is no fuel gauge. So it's a little bit of guesswork. So I had a little peer inside the tank and it don't see a whole lot in there. So yeah, we'll go and stick a little bit in it and then we'll head across the course up towards the Lake District and see what the old girl's made of. So we are just outside Dalton-in-Furness at the moment. For anyone who's not local, that white building you can see up there is JD Comps. That's a car dealership base where they operate the competitions from as well. So sitting on the bike, I mean, I'm a reasonably tall rider and you probably can't quite see, but my legs fit into this groove in the tank perfectly. I don't think I've ever rode a bike that I feel so comfortable on it, almost as part of the bike rather than sat on it. Perception when you're looking at it as opposed to the Gen 2 like what I've got myself, it looks a lot bigger. You know, you've got a big bubbly tailpiece on the back, you've got very big wide screens here at the front. Reminds me a bit of when I did the TL 1000R review, where it looks like this really big hard work, you know, bike you've got a manhandle about, and actually when you get on it, that's really not the case. So yeah, this feels quite similar in that respect, but there's no doubt it's 100% a racing position. I mean, so my legs are locked under the tank here, and the pegs are very high. You know, the bars are really forwards and low, and you can see how easy it would be to just pivot your elbows and get your head straight into the screen. So the last bike that I reviewed on the channel was the Honda Fireblade Triple R. So that's a 2020 model, which obviously is absolutely packed to the brim with rider aids. You know, you got wheelie control, traction control, ABS, everything, engine braking is programmable, every foreseeable option that you could imagine that bike has. And then to jump, next bike reviewed is this one, obviously back to the golden age, the golden era of superbikes before everything was electronically controlled and you had just your brain to ass connection. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't feel good. It feels really, really good. So all you've got on this bike in terms of rider aid is a very, very primitive slipper clutch that in fact isn't even a proper slipper clutch. It operates under vacuum, but kind of has the same effect as what a slipper clutch would. But that's about it, to be honest. The rest of it's purely down to the rider. I know from experience from the Gen 2, and I assume it'll be the exact same with this one, with the Gen 1. The satisfaction you get for riding the bike well is quite unusual. You could probably associate to the same as if you bought maybe like a race orientated supercar, where it's perhaps not the easiest thing to drive on the road. So if you jumped on an R1, a CBR, I mean a perfect example was the unrelated, look how easy that went into neutral. And if you'd seen the Gen 2 review that I did, you'd be first, second, first, second, first, second. By the time you get into neutral, you're ready to set off again. Yeah, anyway, so even that 2020 Fireblade that I did, that's 217 brake horsepower, I think it is. Incredibly capable bike, but still so easy to ride. You know, it's very flattering. It sort of fills you with confidence. Even the Panigale review that I did was very similar. You know, it'll kind of go as fast as you want it to go, whereas a bike like this one, the Gen 2 review that I did, even the TL 1000R from Suzuki that we did, is a little bit different in the sense that it's not easy to ride. You know, if you're not silly, it's going to bite back and it's probably going to hurt. But when you do get it right, it's unbelievably satisfying. So obviously the shape of the bikes took a lot of inspiration from the two-stroke original Aprilia RS bikes. Even these mirrors are in fact exactly the same as what was on the old RS bikes. And for me, in fact growing up on those little race bikes, you know, I have some of my best memories on being on two wheels. Were flying around on those little two-strokes, you know. We went all over the place, you know, British super bikes, the Isle of Man TT, and such fun little bikes to ride. And certainly for me at the minute, just sitting on this bike feels so nostalgic, even though I've never ridden an RSV before. So we're going to pull into here, we'll fill up, and then we'll head out, I say, up the coast. Hopefully we can get some better roads and we can see what the old girl's made of. One thing to take a note of if you ever do buy or even just ride, I don't know if the RSV4 are the same, but the RSV like we've got today, and for sure the RSVR from 04 onwards, the indicator and the horn are kind of the opposite way around to what you'd expect, so you have to be really careful. The amount of times I've come off and try and turn the indicator off and actually hit the horn instead. No diesel available, no problem. Alright, I'll be back with you in just a minute, we'll fill up. Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll get through this little bit of traffic here. Once you get to the other side of town now, we've got a lovely coast road that heads up towards the Lake District. So coming through town here, it's suspension is just rock hard. So when you first sit on the bike, the suspension barely compresses at all, you know, there's no mistaking what this bike's designed to do. Definitely not this. Obviously the O-lens is fully adjustable. You could play around with the settings there and soften it up a little bit, but to be honest, I'm not sure you'd want to, because you know, that's kind of the whole purpose of the bike, really. Negotiating around town, I am very impressed with how smooth the bike is. It's not what I expected at all. Like I say, the RSVR was the Gen 2, sorry, so they say that the version that I reviewed last year, very snatchy in town, you know, quite hard work. If I'm honest, actually, I'm very surprised. So the clutch is light, it's not snatchy at all, it's easy to get into neutral. It is getting quite hot, but no more than I'd expect any other superbike. I mean, the Gen 2 version, I recall, gets very hot. You've obviously got twin pipes on that one, and sat in traffic, you can feel it cooking your thighs. Slightly lower slung exhaust on the RSV Mille like what we're on today. Yeah, I always envisioned that I'd end up buying one of these bikes for probably the last 15 or 20 years, probably since he even came out, in fact. Not sure exactly what it is, but something just appeals on a massive personal level. I wrote an article on the website last year where I reeled off some of my all-time favourite superbikes. You know, some honourable mentions on there. You got the 916, there's the Norton SG superbike, which was before Norton had got into administration and all the drama that happened with that. But yeah, this particular bike, the RSV Mille, made the list. Like I say, it's always been a bike that's appealed to me. A little fun fact, actually, my little dog, who is now almost 16 years old, bless her heart, it's called Millie, and she's named after this bike. So I've just realised the speedo there is actually in kilometres, 40 kilometres. I'm not sure exactly what that is. I guess that's around 26 miles an hour. Pointing that out to Rob when I get back, because I did also notice the red line is stopping here around 6,000 RPM. So the bike will rev past it. It's only the speedo that flashes up and the shift indicator light starts blinking. If I remember correctly, I had a similar issue on the RSVR Gen 2. I think it's something to do when the battery gets disconnected. It's quite easy. You can adjust it by, you know, a combination of the button presses here. But just in case you see that flashing up, it's nothing to worry about. A very common occurrence on these old Aprilias. Not sure if you can make it out on the camera, but straight ahead there, right on the horizon, you may or may not be able to see it. I'll try and see if I can zoom in and editing. Yeah, straight across from us, across the channel is Blackpool. That's where we reviewed the CBR Triple RSP last month. I'm not sure what the next bike's going to be. In fact, the problem is where I'm based up here, northwest England, there isn't really a whole lot in way of bike dealers. So you've kind of got to travel, which is not the end of the world, but obviously it just takes a little bit more planning. But I would like to arrange an RSV4 review. And so I've done the Gen 1, I've done the Gen 2, so I'd like to do the RSV4. I'd like to do the new shape S1000 Triple R, or even better the M1000 Triple R, but that might be pushing a little bit in terms of what's feasible that they might let us go out and play on. And then I'd like to have a look at some of the new Panigales as well. So I mean the V4, the V4S. Again, I think the V4R might be a bit ambitious to be able to get the opportunity to ride, and even the little, is it the V2? Push on a little bit here. We're going to be here all day, aren't we? As I mentioned, I'm very surprised that this Gen 1 Aprilia feels easier to ride than the Gen 2 version. Low to mid-range torque is just so aggressive. No messing about at all. What an absolute pleasure to even contemplate the fact that this bike's now 20 years old. Wouldn't think it at all. Just so eager to get going in low RPMs. Yeah, as I was saying back there, the Gen 2 review I did notice back brake was crap, to be honest. It's funny, it's the exact same story on this one. More of a gesture than anything else. I mean, obviously using it will still help stabilise the bike. I know on some of my own bikes, and particularly little CBR 600, and I use the back brake quite a lot, to be honest. Like, you know, if you just coming up to traffic lights or anything like that. Whereas with this, and certainly the Gen 2 as well, it doesn't really do anything, to be honest. You can kind of feel a little bit of drag coming from the back when you're heavy on the brakes, but it's certainly not going to do you any favours in getting stopped quickly. Fortunately, the Brembos on the front are exceptional. Lovely progressive feeling to the braking. Certainly you could lift the rear wheel without even trying if you're not careful, and similarly you can lift the front wheel really easy without trying if you're not careful. You know, that low end torque, a quick shifty bump to the back and a quick blip on the throttle, and it's going to be up on one wheel before you even know what you're doing, which again is probably another reason why the fork seals are prone to going on these bikes. When I heard a lot of reports from bikes from this era, particularly twins, you know, they weren't really mapped, they weren't really set up for low RPM. They were made no bones about being a race bike. That's exactly what they were designed to do. Like your modern day bikes are kind of tuned and set up in a fashion that will suit everybody. You know, they can go quick, they're comfortable on, like, you know, your big A roads, they're okay in town. And I mentioned it a couple of times, but I really didn't have very good expectations for this bike on situations like this, where, you know, you just kind of cruise in, you slip in the clutch. It's but it's really no trouble at all. I'm very pleasantly surprised. What an absolute pleasure, really. So smooth. It's funny really to say it's the Gen 2 that I did the review on, and doesn't really share any similarities at all other than the fact that it's a V-twin. This feels like a totally different bike. Obviously a slightly unfair comparison because this one is sporting the full Öhlins. The RSVR review I did wasn't a factory, it was just a standard RSVR, so it's got a, I think it's a sax unit in the back, not 100%, and the power you've got to push out of those corners, not to mention the soundtrack, awesome, just awesome. You have so much engine braking as well. Let off the throttle and you can just feel yourself lurching forward as the engine fights to slow the bike down. If you're on like a big sweeping A road, you probably wouldn't even need to use your brakes, just use the engine braking alone. Again, apologies about any wind noise, it's really windy today. Which, if I was to pick a negative, that could be a negative for this bike. You've got these huge solid fairings on the side, do act as a bit of a wind sail. So if you're pushing on a bigger A road and you pass like an opening in like a gate opening or something like that, you do feel the wind hit the bike, just sort of throw you a little bit to the centre of the road. Not really a negative, to be honest, it's just something to be aware of more than anything. The thing is, with a bike like this, well, with any bike really, but I think more so something like this where it's not the most user friendly, it's certainly not a beginner bike, you do have to show it a little bit of respect. It's funny because I've rode a lot of twins and you kind of never ceases to impress you. You put them along at low RPM and then like a slight twist on the throttle and it's just thrown, absolutely just launched into a world of noise and acceleration, and just like that it's back again to like a lazy docile cruiser. What an absolute pleasure this bike is, it really is. I always said I wanted to get one and now I'm 100% sure I want to get one. If you're looking for something a little bit different to have some fun on the weekends, or even a track bike, you could do a lot worse than considering an RSV Mille. Well, I had loads of fun on this bike today, awesome bit of kit. So we're heading back towards the dealership now. I'll see if I can find somewhere a little bit quieter to pull over, and we will have a little bit of a summarise and I'll give you my closing thoughts after spending a day on this bike.
What a machine, what a machine. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm a huge fan of Aprilia, the RSVR Gen 2, and as I mentioned, this is my first time riding the Gen 1 RSV. Looking forward to it for a long time, and I must say it definitely didn't disappoint. Riding the bike, it's just baffling to think that this bike's actually 20 years old. The mid to low range torque is just phenomenal and it handles beautifully. After spending the full day with the bike, if I'm honest, there was not really anything I didn't like about it. If I had to really sort of nitpick, it's not hugely comfortable. I mean, it's not uncomfortable by any accounts, but it's not hugely comfortable if you want to do some long distance riding. The pegs are very high, you're sort of really forced into a racing position. It's a little bit of a nightmare in town, it's a little bit lurchy at the low RPM, but for me at least, this only adds to its charm. Old Italian superbikes do come with a little bit of a stigma attached when it comes to reliability, and personally I think that's a little bit unfair. One of the RSV's biggest issues really is the electronics. So the stock battery is too small for the big V-twin motor. The electrics can be quite temperamental, especially when they're cold or if they get wet. There is silly known issues like the mileage resetting, which is something to be aware of if you're looking at buying one. The front fork seals were prone to start leaking, and the rear suspension linkage, as well as in the Gen 2 version of this bike, could be a little bit iffy. But all of this stuff really is easily sorted. You know, the battery, not an issue to upgrade it. Forks, really a 20-year-old bike should be serviced anyway. In truth, you know, it might not be as dependable as a Japanese inline 4, but that doesn't mean it's an unreliable bike by any stretch of the imagination. If you've ever owned an Italian, especially an early Italian superbike, you'll know exactly what I mean. They have the quirks, and that just adds to the charm. So that's the bad points, if you want to call it the bad points. The good points, well, just look at it, you know, it's an absolutely stunning bike. The RSV now is very quickly becoming collectible and very quickly becoming a classic. I know Bennett's Insurance here in the UK are able to offer classic bike insurance to any bike that's over 14 years old, and I'm fairly confident in saying that the value of these original Gen 1 shaped RSVs is only going to increase over the coming years. You know, the bike just oozes character, and in my opinion it's just an absolute work of art. And being that this was Aprilia's first ever superbike, and paved the way for the RSVR afterward, and now obviously the RSV4. This bike will always be held in very high regard amongst enthusiasts and especially collectors. Would I recommend one? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. You will find a Gen 1 shape or even a Gen 2 shape Aprilia RSV cheaper to buy and cheaper to run than equivalent Ducati of the same era. So that concludes this review of this incredible bike. If you enjoyed the video, if you found the video helpful, please do leave a like. And consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us out. We've got lots more superbike content planned now as we move into summer. Huge thank you again to JD Comps for sponsoring this video. Thanks so much, take care, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.